Three knocks at 507. This is a true story from a small village in Oaxaca, Mexico. The woman who shared this account made me promise to tell it exactly as she remembered. She said if enough people know what happened to her, maybe the thing that followed her home will think twice before coming for someone else. I cannot verify everything she told me, but I can tell you this: when she finished speaking, her hands were shaking so badly she could not hold her cup of coffee. And when I left her house that evening, I checked my rearview mirror 17 times on the drive home. My name is Mercedes Solano de Vega. I am 67 years old now, and I have lived alone in this house for the past 12 years. But I was not always alone. And what I am about to tell you began on the 15th of October at exactly 7 minutes past 5 in the afternoon, when a little girl knocked on my door selling candy. She had the sweetest smile I had ever seen. She also had been dead for 2 months. I need you to understand something before I continue. Loneliness is not just an emotion. It is a living thing. It breathes in the corners of empty rooms. It whispers to you when the house grows quiet. And after enough years, you start to whisper back. You start to welcome anything that breaks the silence, even things that should not be welcomed, even things that are not meant for the world of the living. My husband Aurelio passed away 12 years ago. He was not a bad man, but he was a hard man. Everything in our house happened according to his rules, his schedule, his voice. When he spoke, I listened. When he decided, I followed. That was simply how things were in our generation, in our village, in our time. I loved him despite his harshness, or perhaps because I never knew any different. We were married for 41 years. 41 years of his footsteps on the wooden floor, his radio playing in the mornings, his chair creaking at the head of the dinner table. When he died from a stroke in the bathroom one Tuesday afternoon, I lost more than a husband. I lost every sound that had ever filled this house. Our sons left for the United States 23 years ago. Miguel went first, then Roberto followed 2 years later. They promised to send money, and they did it first. They promised to call every week, and they did it first. They promised to visit every Christmas, and they never did, not once. The phone calls grew shorter. Monthly became quarterly. Quarterly became birthdays and holidays. Now I'm lucky to hear their voices twice a year. They have children I've never met, grandchildren who would not recognize my face if they passed me on the street. When I tell them I miss them, they say they miss me too. But missing someone and doing something about it are two very different things. I live in a village called San Pablo Etla, about 30 kilometers from Oaxaca City. It is a beautiful place if you appreciate the kind of beauty that comes with decay. The houses here are old, built by hands that have long since turned to dust. The streets are unpaved, and when it rains, the mud swallows your shoes up to the ankles. We have electricity, but it comes and goes like a moody relative. Most nights I rely on oil lamps, the same kind my grandmother used when she was young. The shadows they cast on the walls are never quite the same shape twice. My house sits at the end of a dirt road separated from my nearest neighbor by almost 200 meters of empty field. During the day, I can see Consuelo's blue roof from my kitchen window. At night, I cannot see anything beyond my own fence. The darkness here is absolute. No street lights, no passing cars. Just the stars overhead and the sounds of things moving in the brush that I have learned not to think about too carefully. The villagers say this land has always been strange. They say the boundary between the living and the dead grows thin here, especially in October, especially as we approach Dia de Muertos. They say our ancestors chose this valley because the spirits could visit more easily. When I was younger, I thought these were just stories old people told to frighten children. Now I am the old person, and I no longer think they were just stories. On the night of October 14th, the night before everything changed, I could not sleep. This was not unusual. Sleep has become a stranger to me in my old age, visiting only when it pleases and leaving before I am ready. I lay in my bed listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling, the creak of old wood, the scratch of a branch against the window, the distant bark of a dog somewhere in the village. But that night there was something else, a sound I could not identify, a soft clicking noise like someone tapping their fingernails against glass. The windows in this house are old and their frames have warped over the decades. Sometimes they rattle when the air pressure changes. That must have been what I heard, just the house breathing in its sleep. But then I heard the second sound, footsteps. Light, careful footsteps, like a child trying not to wake anyone. They seemed to be coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. I held my breath and listened. 1 step, 2 steps, 3, then nothing. Just silence so thick I could feel it pressing against my ears. I should have gotten up. I should have checked. But my legs would not obey me. Fear has a way of turning your body into a prison. So I lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound to return. It did not. Eventually, exhaustion won its battle against terror, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I dreamed that night. I dreamed of a little girl standing at the edge of my property just outside the fence. She wore a white dress embroidered with orange flowers, the kind of marigolds we use to decorate the altars for our dead. Her hair was black and long braided into 2 plaits tied with orange ribbons. She was smiling at me, but there was something wrong with the smile. It was too wide. It stretched across her face in a way that human muscles should not allow. And her eyes were black from edge to edge, like 2 holes punched through the fabric of reality into the darkness beyond. She raised her hand and waved at me. Then she pointed at my front door. I woke with the taste of marigolds in my mouth. The morning of October 15th arrived gray and heavy. Clouds had gathered overnight, turning the sky the color of old bruises. The air smelled of rain that had not yet fallen, and something else, something sweet and rotten like flowers left too long in a vase. I tried to shake off the unease from my dream, but it clung to me like wet cloth. I went through my morning routine mechanically. Coffee, bread, a few minutes spent staring at the photographs on my wall, the ones that show a younger version of myself standing next to people who are now either dead or so far away they might as well be. Aurelio in his wedding suit looking serious because he thought smiling in photographs was undignified. My sons as babies, as toddlers, as teenagers who could not wait to escape this village and everything in it. A family that existed once preserved in fading color behind dusty glass. By noon I'd convinced myself that the previous night had been nothing more than an old woman's imagination running wild. The clicking sound was the window. The footsteps were a dream bleeding into wakefulness. The girl with the too wide smile was just my mind processing anxiety about the approaching holiday when the dead are supposed to walk among us. Nothing to worry about. Nothing real. Then I found the footprints. They were in the hallway, pressed into the thin layer of dust that accumulates no matter how often I sweep. Small footprints, child-sized. They led from the front door to my bedroom, then stopped abruptly as if whoever made them had simply vanished into the air. I stood there staring at them for a long time, trying to find a rational explanation. A neighbor's child must have wandered in while I was sleeping, except I always lock my doors. The dust must have been disturbed by wind coming through a crack, except there was no crack and the prints were too defined, too deliberate. I got my broom and swept the hallway clean, but my hands were trembling and I could not stop looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing behind me. At 17 minutes past 4, I heard the church bells in the village center toll the hour. The sound carried across the fields, muffled by the heavy air. Storm coming, I thought. The clouds had grown darker throughout the afternoon, and now they hung so low it seemed I could reach up and touch them. The light had taken on that strange amber quality that comes before a heavy rain, making everything look like it belonged to a different era, a different world. I was in the kitchen preparing my evening meal when I felt it for the first time. The sensation of being watched. It came suddenly and completely, a prickling awareness that spread across the back of my neck and down my spine. I turned around, certain I would find someone standing in the doorway. The doorway was empty, but the feeling did not go away. If anything, it intensified. I walked through the house, checking each room. The bedroom was empty. The bathroom was empty. The small sitting area where Aurelio used to read his newspapers was empty. Everything was exactly as it should be, and yet the feeling persisted, that absolute certainty that unseen eyes were tracking my every movement. When I returned to the kitchen, I noticed the temperature had dropped. My breath came out in small white clouds. In October, in Oaxaca, where the average temperature rarely falls below 20 degrees. The storm must be bringing cold air from the mountains. That was the only explanation that made sense. At exactly 7 minutes past 5, someone knocked on my door. 3 knocks, light, evenly spaced, almost musical. The same rhythm I had heard in my dream when the girl pointed at my front door. I stood frozen in the kitchen, my knife still in my hand, a half-peeled potato forgotten on the cutting board. The knock came again, 3 times, patient, waiting. I should not have answered. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stay where I was, to pretend no one was home, to wait until whatever was on the other side of that door went away. But loneliness makes you stupid. Loneliness makes you desperate for any human contact, any voice besides your own bouncing off empty walls. And underneath the fear there was something else. Curiosity, the terrible, irresistible need to know. I walked to the front door. My hand shook as I reached for the handle. I took a breath, turned the lock, and pulled. She stood on my doorstep with a basket of candy in her hands. A little girl, maybe 11 or 12 years old, with black hair braided into 2 plaits tied with orange ribbons. She wore a white dress embroidered with orange flowers, marigolds, cempasúchil, the flowers of the dead. And she was smiling at me with the most beautiful, innocent smile I'd ever seen. The girl from my dream. Except in the flesh, in the fading afternoon light, she looked completely normal, just a child, just a little girl selling sweets. I asked her what she was selling. She held up her basket and showed me the contents. 8 de membrillo, the quince paste my mother used to make. Coquetas, the coconut candies I loved as a child. Dulce de calabaza, the pumpkin sweets we only made during the season of the dead. Traditional things, nostalgic things. Things that made my heart ache with memories of people long gone. I bought some of each. The girl thanked me, and her voice was clear and sweet, like a bell ringing in the distance. She asked if she could have a glass of water. She said she had walked very far. Looking back, I should have noticed the signs. I should have paid attention to the way my skin prickled when she spoke, the way the shadows seemed to lean toward her, the way the air grew colder the closer she stood. But I was desperate for company. And here was a child, a sweet-faced girl who called me Señora and smiled like sunshine after rain. I invited her in. She sat on the wooden bench beside my front door while I fetched her water. When I handed her the glass, our fingers touched, and I nearly dropped it. Her hands were ice cold, colder than the air, colder than anything living should be. I asked if she was feeling well. She laughed and said she was fine, that she had always run cold. She told me her name was Rosita. She said she lived on the other side of the village near the river. She said her mother made the candies and she sold them after school to help with money. She spoke with such naturalness, such easy charm, that I found myself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Before I knew it, an hour had passed. When she stood to leave, the sun was setting behind the clouds, turning the sky into a wound of orange and red. She promised to return tomorrow. She said she liked talking to me, that most people in the village did not have time for a candy seller. Then she walked down my path through my gate and turned left onto the dirt road. I watched her until she disappeared around the corner, and that was when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. I had not heard her footsteps, not when she walked across my wooden floor, not when she crossed the gravel path, not when she turned onto the dirt road. The evening was silent, and still no wind to mask the sound, no rain to drown it out. I should have heard every step. But there had been nothing. She had moved in absolute silence, like a ghost, like a memory, like something that did not quite belong to this world. I stood in my doorway until the last light faded from the sky. I stood there asking myself why I had not noticed sooner, why I had not questioned a child appearing alone at my door in the approaching dusk, why I had not wondered about her ice-cold hands, her too familiar face, her presence in my dream before I ever saw her in waking life. But I already knew the answer. When you have been alone long enough, you will accept any company. You will ignore any warning. You will open your door to anything that promises to fill the silence, even if that thing should never have knocked in the first place. Rosita returned the next day at exactly 7 minutes past 5. I know the precise time because I had been watching the clock on my wall since 4 o'clock, telling myself I was not waiting for her, that I was simply restless, that the strange events of the previous evening had made me anxious. But when those 3 soft knocks came at exactly the moment I somehow knew they would, I understood that I had been counting every minute. She stood on my doorstep wearing the same white dress embroidered with the same orange marigolds. Her hair was braided in the same style, tied with the same orange ribbons. Her basket held the same arrangement of candies, as if she had not sold a single piece since yesterday. And her smile was exactly as I remembered it, warm and bright and utterly disarming. I bought more candy. I did not need it. The sweets from yesterday sat untouched in my kitchen, but I bought more anyway because purchasing something gave me a reason to keep her at my door, gave me an excuse to extend our interaction. She asked for water again. I invited her inside again. And just like that, a pattern began to form. She came every day that first week, always at 7 minutes past 5. Never a minute earlier, never a minute later. I started to set my daily schedule around her visits, eating my meals earlier so I would be free when she arrived, cleaning the house more carefully, so she would not think me a slovenly old woman. I found myself choosing my nicer clothes, the ones I had stopped wearing after Aurelio died, because there was no one left to see them. I was performing for a 12-year-old girl, and I did not care how pathetic that made me. For the first time in years, I had something to look forward to. On the 3rd day, I offered her food. I had made tamales that morning, the kind my mother taught me to prepare with chicken and green salsa wrapped in banana leaves. Rosita smiled and thanked me but said she was not hungry. She had eaten before coming, she explained. Her mother always made sure she had a full stomach before going out to sell. On the 4th day, I offered her pan dulce with her water. She declined again, saying she had just had merienda at home. I noticed that the glass of water I'd given her remained completely full throughout our entire conversation. When she left, I picked it up and found it had not been touched. Not a single sip. On the 5th day, I decided to take a photograph. I wanted to send it to Miguel and Roberto to show them that their mother was not completely alone, that she had made a friend in the village. My telephone was old and the camera barely functioned, but I managed to position Rosita beside me on the bench where we usually sat. She smiled. I pressed the button. The flash went off. When I looked at the screen, my heart stopped. The photograph showed me sitting on the bench, smiling at the camera, my arm extended around nothing. The space where Rosita should have been was empty, not blurred, not distorted. Simply empty, as if she had never been there at all. I thought the camera had malfunctioned. I took another photograph. Same result. I took a third, making sure Rosita was directly in front of the lens. The image showed only my kitchen wall. Rosita watched me fumble with the phone, her expression patient and slightly amused. When I looked up at her, she tilted her head and asked if something was wrong. I told her the camera was broken. She nodded sympathetically and said that machines often stopped working around her. Her mother's radio did the same thing, she said. Electronics simply did not like her. I accepted this explanation because accepting it was easier than examining it, because I needed her more than I needed truth. The following days brought more signs that I worked increasingly hard to ignore. The lights in my house had always been unreliable, flickering when the village generator struggled under heavy demand. But now they flickered only when Rosita was present, dimming and brightening in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat made of electricity. My radio, the old transistor set that Aurelio had bought in 1987, and that I kept more for sentimental value than practical use, began turning itself on at odd hours, always when Rosita was visiting, always tuned to stations that played songs from decades past, ballads about loss and longing and lovers separated by death. Once it switched on while we were talking and played a song I had not heard since my wedding day. Rosita hummed along as if she knew every note. My telephone stopped receiving calls entirely between the hours of 5 and 7 each evening. I discovered this by accident when I tried to call Consuelo to ask about a recipe. The line was dead, not even static, just absolute silence, as if the device had been disconnected from the world. After 7 o'clock, when Rosita had gone, the dial tone returned as if nothing had happened. I began keeping a mental list of these anomalies, telling myself I was simply documenting quirks of aging infrastructure, power surges, atmospheric interference, old equipment reaching the end of its functional life. Every strange occurrence had a rational explanation if you looked hard enough, and I looked very hard indeed. Then Rosita started knowing things she should not have known. It began innocently enough. She asked me about a painting that hung in my bedroom, a watercolor of the valley that my mother had made when I was young. I had never shown her my bedroom. I had never mentioned the painting. When I asked how she knew about it, she said she had seen it through the window. But my bedroom window faced the back of the house, away from the path she would have taken to reach my door. And the painting hung on the wall opposite the window, invisible from outside, even if someone pressed their face against the glass. A few days later, she mentioned that I talked in my sleep. She said she sometimes heard me when she passed by at night. I asked what she heard. She smiled and said I called out names. Aurelio, Miguel, Roberto. I asked why she would be passing my house at night. She said she sometimes took walks when she could not sleep. Her mother did not mind. The next week she told me that she knew I cried in the evenings. She said she could hear me from very far away, that my sadness carried on the wind like smoke from a fire. She said that was why she started visiting me in the first place. She had heard my loneliness calling to her, and she had followed the sound to my door. The words should have alarmed me. They should have sent me running to the church to light candles and beg the saints for protection. Instead, they made me weep. Someone had heard me. After years of isolation, years of screaming into a void that never answered, someone had finally heard, and she had come. I did not question how a child could hear crying from across the village. I did not ask what she meant by following the sound of loneliness. I simply accepted her explanation because loneliness had made me so desperate for connection that I would overlook any warning sign, forgive any impossibility, embrace any comfort, no matter how wrong it felt. Rosita began responding to my actions before I took them. If I thought about making coffee, she would ask if we could have some before I had moved toward the kitchen. If I considered suggesting we sit outside, she would stand and walk toward the door while the idea was still forming in my mind. It was as if she could read my thoughts, as if the boundary between my inner world and outer world had become transparent in her presence. One afternoon, I decided to test this. I thought very clearly about walking to the window to check the weather. I did not move, did not shift my weight, did not glance in that direction. I simply held the thought in my mind and watched Rosita's face. Her eyes flickered toward the window. She said it looked like rain was coming. I had not spoken a word. I stopped trying to explain things after that. Some truths are too large for explanations. Some realities exist whether we understand them or not. The invasion of my private spaces began subtly. I would find objects move slightly from where I had left them. A cup shifted 2 inches to the left. A chair pushed out from the table. The photograph of Aurelio turned to face a different direction. Small disturbances that could have been my own forgetfulness, my aging mind playing tricks on my memory of where things belonged. Then I found the fingerprints. I woke one morning to discover small handprints on my bedroom mirror, child-sized prints pressed against the glass, as if someone had stood there watching their own reflection, or watching me sleep. The prints were not dusty like normal fingerprints. They were clear and defined, as if whoever made them had pressed very hard, had wanted to leave a mark that could not be easily erased. I cleaned the mirror. The next morning the prints had returned. Different positions, this time clustered near the corner that faced my bed. I cleaned them again. They appeared again. This continued for 4 days until I stopped cleaning and simply let them remain a silent testament to whatever watched me in the darkness. The marigolds began appearing inside my house. I would find them in unexpected places, a single bloom on my pillow, a handful of petals scattered across the kitchen table, a small bouquet arranged in the cup I used for my morning coffee. I did not grow marigolds. My neighbors did not grow marigolds. The nearest field of cempasúchil was in the village cemetery 1/2 kilometer away. I asked Rosita if she was leaving the flowers. She said no, but her smile suggested otherwise. She said the flowers were a gift from someone who loved me. When I asked who, she simply shrugged and changed the subject. Consuelo came to visit on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks after Rosita first appeared. My neighbor was a practical woman, thick-bodied and sharp-tongued, with no patience for nonsense and no belief in the supernatural. She had known me for 40 years. She had held my hand at Aurelio's funeral. If anyone could ground me in reality, it was Consuelo. She found me in the kitchen talking animatedly to what she perceived as an empty chair. I did not realize anything was wrong until I saw her face. She stood in the doorway with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of horror and pity that turned her familiar features into something almost unrecognizable. I stopped mid-sentence. Rosita was sitting right beside me. I could see her clearly, could smell the faint sweetness of candy that always surrounded her, could feel the cold that radiated from her small body. Consuelo asked me who I was talking to. I said I was talking to Rosita, the little girl who came to visit me each afternoon. Consuelo's face went pale. She said there was no one there. She said I was sitting alone in my kitchen speaking to thin air. I turned to Rosita. She was looking at Consuelo with an expression I had not seen before. Not angry, not afraid, something else, something calculating, something ancient wearing the mask of a child. Consuelo came closer. She said she was worried about me, that perhaps the loneliness had affected my mind, that maybe I should see a doctor in the city. She said people sometimes imagined companions when they were isolated too long. She said it was nothing to be ashamed of. Then she stopped. Her nose wrinkled. She asked what that smell was. I smelled nothing unusual. Just the faint sweetness. I'd grown accustomed to the candy and flowers scent that followed Rosita everywhere. But Consuelo's face contorted with disgust. She said it smelled like death. She said it smelled like the flowers we put on graves, mixed with something rotten underneath something that had been dead for a long time. She left quickly after that, promising to return the next day, urging me to rest, to eat properly, to consider seeing a priest, if not a doctor. I watched her hurry down my path, glancing back over her shoulder as if she expected something to chase her. When I turned back to the kitchen, Rosita was gone. But written in the condensation on the window, in small letters that could only have been traced by a child's finger, were 4 words: "She cannot see me." That night I decided to follow her. I had asked many times where she lived, and she had always given vague answers. Near the river, on the other side of the village, far away. I had accepted these non-answers because asking more specific questions felt rude, felt like prying into a child's privacy. But after Consuelo's visit, after the words on the window, I needed to know. I needed to understand what I had invited into my life. So when Rosita left that evening, I waited until she had walked 50 meters down the road, then slipped out my door and followed. The sun was setting rapidly, painting the clouds in shades of blood and fire. Rosita moved through the fading light with an ease that seemed unnatural, never stumbling on the uneven ground, never slowing to check her path. I struggled to keep up my old legs, protesting against the pace, my lungs burning with effort. She turned off the main road onto a narrow trail I had never noticed before. The trail led through a field of dry grass toward a cluster of trees that marked the edge of the village. Beyond those trees lay the old cemetery, the one they had stopped using 50 years ago when the new cemetery opened closer to the church. I followed her into the trees. The light faded quickly here, swallowed by the canopy overhead. I could barely see Rosita's white dress moving through the shadows ahead of me. Then she stopped. We had reached a crossroads. Two dirt paths intersected beneath an ancient oak tree, its branches twisted into shapes that looked almost deliberate, almost designed to frighten. Rosita stood at the center of the intersection, her back to me. She was perfectly still. I called her name. She did not respond. I stepped closer. My foot struck something metallic. I looked down and saw a small marker, the kind they used to commemorate accidents, to memorialize lives cut short in places where death came without warning. The marker was old-weathered, its paint faded almost to illegibility, but I could still read the words etched into its surface. Here on August 15th, Rosita Hernandez Garcia, age 12, returned to the Lord. I looked up at the girl standing before me. She had turned to face me now, and her expression was no longer the sweet smile I had grown to love. It was something else, something sad, something resigned, something that had been waiting for this moment since the first knock on my door. She asked if I understood now. She asked if I knew who she was, what she was, why she had come. I could not speak. My throat had closed around words that refused to form. I could only stare at the marker, at the date that proved she had been dead for 2 months before she ever appeared at my doorstep. 2 months of lying in the ground while I sat in my house crying into the silence. 2 months of death before she heard my loneliness and came to answer it. Rosita said she had not meant to frighten me. She said she only wanted company. She said being dead was lonely, too lonelier than I could imagine. And when she heard me calling out in the darkness, she had followed my voice like a beacon. I asked why she had not told me the truth. She said I had not wanted to know. She said I had seen the signs and chosen to ignore them, had accepted impossible explanations rather than face the reality of what she was. She said I had needed her more than I needed truth. And she was right. God help me, she was right. Then she walked into the shadows between the trees and disappeared. Not faded, not dissolved. Simply stepped into darkness and ceased to exist like a candle flame pinched between wet fingers. I stood at that crossroads until the moon rose, looking at the marker of a child who had died 2 months ago and had been visiting me every day since. When I finally returned home, my legs aching, my heart heavier than it had ever been, I found my front door standing open. I was certain I had closed it. I was certain I had locked it. I stepped inside. The house was dark. The oil lamps had burned out in my absence. I fumbled for matches, struck one, and held it up to illuminate the room. Rosita stood in the corner of my bedroom, but she was not the Rosita I knew. Her white dress was stained dark with something wet. Her face was pale as bone, her eyes sunken deep into her skull. And around her throat, livid against her gray skin, was a ring of purple bruises in the shape of fingers. The match burned down to my fingers. I dropped it. Darkness swallowed the room. And in that darkness, I heard her voice, close enough to feel cold breath against my ear. Now you know what they did to me. The morning after I learned the truth about Rosita, I went to find her mother. I had spent the hours between darkness and dawn sitting rigid in my chair, surrounded by guttering candles, replaying every moment of the past weeks in my mind. The sweet girl who had brought me candy, the cold hands I had dismissed as poor circulation, the photographs that showed only empty space, the fingerprints on my mirror, the marigolds appearing in impossible places. Every sign had been there from the beginning, and I had chosen blindness because blindness was easier than truth. But now I could no longer pretend. A murdered child had crossed the boundary between death and life to find me. She had chosen me as her witness, her confessor, perhaps her instrument of justice. I did not know what she truly wanted. I did not know if helping her was even possible. But I knew I could not simply wait in my house for her to return. I needed to understand what had happened to her. I needed to know who had wrapped their hands around her throat and stolen her life. The village was quiet when I stepped outside. A gray mist hung low over the fields, turning familiar landmarks into ghostly suggestions of themselves. My legs were stiff from sitting all night, and every joint protested as I walked down the dirt road toward the river where Rosita had said she lived. I did not know exactly where to find her mother's house, but in a village this small, everyone knew everyone. Someone would point me in the right direction. The first person I encountered was old Domingo, who sat on his porch every morning watching the world pass by. He had been doing this for as long as I could remember, a fixture of the village as permanent as the church bell tower. I asked him if he knew where the Hernandez Garcia family lived. His face changed when I spoke the name. Something shuddered behind his eyes, a door closing against unwelcome questions. He told me the house was at the end of the road that ran along the river, the last one before the trees began. Then he looked away and would not meet my gaze again. I thanked him and continued walking, but I felt his eyes on my back until I turned the corner. I passed 3 more villagers on my way to the river. Each one reacted the same way when I mentioned Rosita's family. A flinch, a tightening around the mouth, a sudden fascination with something in the middle distance. They answered my questions with the fewest possible words and then found reasons to be elsewhere. The village knew something about Rosita's death. The village was keeping secrets. The house appeared through the mist like a wound in the landscape. It was small, smaller than mine, with walls that had once been painted blue but had faded to the color of a bruise. A wooden fence surrounded a yard where chickens scratched at the dirt. And on the porch, sitting in a chair that looked too large for her shrunken frame, was a woman who could only be Rosita's mother. Teresa Hernandez was perhaps 40 years old, but grief had aged her beyond her years. Her hair was streaked with gray. Her face was lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from crying rather than smiling. She watched me approach with eyes that held no curiosity, no welcome, only a bone-deep exhaustion that seemed to radiate from her like heat from a dying fire. I introduced myself. I told her I lived on the other side of the village near the fields. I told her I had known her daughter. The words hung in the air between us. Teresa did not move, did not speak, did not even seem to breathe. Then slowly she nodded and gestured toward the empty chair beside her. I sat. For a long moment neither of us said anything. The chickens clucked and scratched. The mist drifted between the houses. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked once and then fell silent. Teresa spoke first. She asked how I had known Rosita. I told her the truth, or at least part of it. I said Rosita had come to my house selling candy. I said we had talked. I said I had grown fond of her. Teresa's laugh was bitter and short, more like a cough than an expression of amusement. She said that sounded like her daughter, always talking to strangers, always making friends with lonely old people who had no one else. She said Rosita had been like that since she was small, drawn to anyone who seemed sad or isolated, as if she could sense their pain and wanted to heal it. I asked what had happened to her. The silence that followed was so heavy I could feel it pressing against my chest. Teresa stared at the mist, at the chickens, at anything except my face. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, emptied of all emotion, as if she had told this story so many times that it had worn grooves in her soul. Rosita had been walking home from school on August 15th. It was a route she had taken hundreds of times, a path she knew as well as her own heartbeat. She should have arrived by 4 o'clock. By 6, Teresa had begun to worry. By 8, she had started searching. By midnight, the whole village was looking. They found her body at the crossroads the next morning. Teresa's voice cracked on the word body. She paused, swallowed, continued. The official report said it was an accident, a hit and run, someone driving too fast on the dirt roads, striking a child fleeing without stopping. The police came from the city, asked a few questions, wrote some notes and left. No one was ever arrested. No one was ever charged. The case was closed within a week. But Teresa knew it was not an accident. She had seen her daughter's body before they took it away. She had seen the bruises on her throat. She had seen the marks that no car could have made. Someone had killed Rosita with their bare hands. Someone had murdered her child and left her lying in the dirt like garbage. I asked if she knew who had done it. Teresa shook her head. She said she had suspicions, everyone had suspicions, but no one would speak. The village had closed ranks around its secrets. Neighbors who had known her family for generations suddenly could not remember seeing anything that day. Friends stopped visiting. Even the priest seemed reluctant to discuss what had happened, as if speaking the truth aloud would bring some terrible consequence down upon them all. I asked what she thought had happened. Teresa looked at me, then really looked at me for the first time since I had arrived. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, but behind the exhaustion burned something else. Anger. A fury so intense it had calcified into something almost like calm. She said there was a man in the village. She would not speak his name, but she said he had always watched Rosita with eyes that made her uncomfortable. He had offered the girl rides home from school. He had given her small gifts, candies and ribbons and pretty things that a child would like. Teresa had told her daughter to stay away from him, had warned her about men like that, had thought she was being careful enough. She was wrong. On the day Rosita died, someone had seen her getting into a truck at the edge of the village, a blue truck with rust on the fenders, the same truck that belonged to the man Teresa would not name. When the police asked the witness about this, the witness suddenly remembered being somewhere else that day. When Teresa tried to confront the man directly, he had smiled at her and asked if she really wanted to make accusations she could not prove. He had asked if she wanted to end up like her daughter. The threat had been delivered calmly, almost pleasantly, like a neighbor discussing the weather. And Teresa had understood that she would never get justice. Not from the police, not from the courts, not from a village too frightened to speak. Her daughter was dead, and the man who killed her walked free, and there was nothing she could do about it. I asked about Rosita's father. Teresa said he had left years ago before Rosita was born. It had always been just the two of them. Now it was just her. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The mist began to lift as the sun climbed higher, revealing the village in harsh morning light. I thought about Rosita standing in my kitchen with her basket of candy. I thought about her smile, her laugh, her cold hands, and her darker-than-dark eyes. I thought about the bruises around her throat and the fury that must have driven her back across the boundary between death and life. She had not come to me for company. She had come because she wanted justice. She wanted someone to know the truth about what had happened to her. And now I knew, but knowing was not enough. Knowing changed nothing. The man who had killed her was still walking free. The village was still keeping its secrets. And Rosita was still dead, still trapped in whatever limbo existed between this world and the next, still waiting for something that might never come. I thanked Teresa for talking to me. I told her I was sorry for her loss, though the words felt hollow and inadequate. She nodded without looking at me and said something that I did not understand until much later. She said I should be careful. She said Rosita had always been a persistent child, always pushed until she got what she wanted. She said death had probably not changed that. I walked home through the lifting mist, turning Teresa's words over in my mind. Persistent. The girl who had knocked on my door 3 times. The girl who had returned every day at exactly the same time. The girl who had left fingerprints on my mirror and flowers on my pillow and messages written in condensation on my windows. Persistent was an understatement. The question was, what exactly did she want from me? That night I tried to leave. I had decided that staying in my house was no longer safe. Whatever Rosita had become, whatever she wanted, I was not equipped to deal with it. I would go to Consuelo's house or to the church or anywhere that was not these four walls that had become saturated with the presence of the dead. I would seek help from the priest, from a curandero, from anyone who knew how to deal with spirits that refused to rest. I packed a small bag with clothes and necessities. I checked that all the candles were extinguished and the stove was cold. I put on my coat and walked to the front door. It would not open. I turned the handle. I pulled. I pushed. The door remained firmly shut, as immovable as if it had been nailed into its frame. I checked the lock. It was not engaged. There was nothing physically preventing the door from opening, and yet it would not budge. I went to the back door. Same result. The windows were stuck as well, their frames suddenly swollen tight despite the dry weather. Every exit from my house had become impassable. I was trapped. The temperature began to drop. It happened slowly at first, a slight chill that made me reach for my shawl. Then faster, a cold that sank through my clothes and settled into my bones like water seeping into stone. My breath came out in white clouds. Ice crystals began to form on the inside of the windows, spreading across the glass in patterns that looked almost like writing. I tried the front door again, putting all my weight against it, pounding with my fists until my hands ached. Nothing. The door might as well have been a wall. That was when the lights went out. Every candle I had lit, every oil lamp I had prepared for the evening, extinguished simultaneously, as if snuffed by a giant hand. The darkness that followed was absolute, the kind of darkness that exists only in places far from cities, far from electricity, far from any source of artificial light. I could not see my hand in front of my face. I could not see anything at all, but I could hear footsteps, small light footsteps moving through the darkness of my house, not approaching, not retreating, simply moving, circling as if whatever made them was examining its territory, checking the boundaries of its domain. I called out Rosita's name. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Thick, heavy silence that pressed against my ears like water. I held my breath, straining to hear anything, any indication of where she was, what she was doing. Then a voice spoke directly behind me, so close I could feel cold breath against my neck. She said she was disappointed in me. She said she had thought I understood. She said she had thought I was going to help her. I spun around, saw nothing, felt only the displacement of air as something moved past me in the darkness. The voice came again from a different direction, now somewhere to my left. She asked where I was going. She asked if I was trying to leave her. She asked if I was like everyone else in the village, willing to see a murdered child and do nothing about it. I said I was not trying to abandon her. I said I was frightened. I said I did not know how to help her, did not know what she expected me to do. Laughter. Not the bright, innocent laughter I had heard during our afternoon visits. This was something else, something older, something that scraped against my nerves like broken glass. The laughter came from everywhere at once, from the walls, from the floor, from inside my own head. She said I could start by staying. She said I could start by listening. She said she had waited 2 months for someone willing to see her, and she was not going to let me go so easily. The cold intensified. I could feel ice forming in my lungs with every breath. My fingers were going numb. My joints ached with a chill that seemed to penetrate to the marrow. I stumbled toward where I thought the fireplace was, hoping to find matches, hoping to create some source of warmth and light in the consuming darkness. My shin struck something hard. I fell forward, catching myself on my hands, feeling the cold wooden floor beneath my palms. Something wet touched my face. I recoiled, scrambling backward, and my hand closed around a small object. A match. A single match lying on the floor as if placed there deliberately. I struck it against the rough wood. The flame caught small and fragile, barely enough to illuminate the space immediately around me. But it was enough to see. Rosita stood in the center of my living room. She was not the girl I had known. This version was something else entirely, something that wore Rosita's face like a mask but could not quite make it fit properly. Her skin was gray, the color of old ash. Her eyes were completely black. No whites, no iris, just endless pools of darkness that reflected nothing. Her white dress was stained with something dark that might have been blood, or might have been earth, or might have been something worse. And around her throat, vivid against the gray skin, were the bruises, the finger marks, the evidence of her murder displayed like a grotesque necklace. She smiled. The smile stretched too wide, pulling her lips back to reveal teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp, arranged in rows like something from the depths of the ocean. It was a smile that had nothing to do with happiness or warmth or anything human. She asked if I could see her now. She asked if I could see what they had done to her. She asked if I understood why she could not rest. The match burned down to my fingers. I dropped it. Darkness returned. I heard her moving closer. Each step made no sound on the wooden floor. But I could feel the air pressure change, could sense her presence approaching like a wave of cold. I backed away until I hit the wall, then slid along it, trying to reach the fireplace, trying to find another match, trying to do anything except stand still and wait for her to reach me. She spoke again, and this time her voice was different, layered, as if many voices were speaking through her at once, some high and childlike, some low and ancient, all of them filled with a hunger that made my soul shrivel. She said she had been patient. She said she had been kind. She had come to me gently, had tried to make me understand without frightening me. But I had not listened. I had seen her and not seen her. I had known the truth and refused to accept it. I had tried to run away. She said she was done being patient. Something grabbed my ankle. Small fingers, ice-cold, strong as steel cables. I screamed and kicked, but the grip only tightened. I felt myself being pulled, dragged across the floor toward the center of the room where she waited. I clawed at the floorboards, trying to find purchase, trying to stop my inexorable slide toward whatever fate she had planned for me. My fingernails scraped against wood and found nothing to hold. The darkness pressed against my eyes like a physical weight. The cold had become so intense that I could no longer feel my extremities, could no longer tell where my body ended, and the frozen air began. The dragging stopped. I lay on my back in the center of my living room, gasping for breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could not see anything, but I could feel her standing over me, could sense the weight of her attention pressing down like a stone. She asked if I was ready to listen now. She asked if I was ready to help her. I said yes. I said I would do anything. I said I would help her however I could, just please stop. The pressure eased slightly. The cold retreated a few degrees. When she spoke again, her voice was almost normal, almost the voice of the girl who had sat on my bench and asked for water. She said there were rules. She said the dead could not act directly against the living. She could frighten me. She could show me things. She could make my life miserable in 100 small ways. But she could not make me do what she needed. She could not force me to seek justice on her behalf. That was why she needed me to choose. That was why she needed me to want to help her. Because only the willing could bridge the gap between the dead and the living. Only those who chose to act could carry the truth from one world to the other. I asked what she wanted me to do. She said she wanted me to find the man who killed her. She wanted me to make him confess. She wanted the village to know what he had done, to speak his name aloud, to acknowledge the murder that everyone knew about and no one would admit. She wanted justice, or if not justice, then at least recognition. She wanted to exist in living memory as something other than a victim. She wanted her death to mean something. I said I was an old woman. I said I had no power, no influence, no way to force anyone to do anything. I said the man who killed her was protected by fear, by silence, by the complicity of an entire community. She said she knew. She said that was why she had chosen me. I did not understand. I said as much. She explained. She said the man who killed her was afraid of many things. He was afraid of the police, of prison, of losing his standing in the village. But he was not afraid of ghosts. He did not believe in them. He thought that when you died, you simply stopped existing and nothing you had done in life could ever catch up with you. She said she was going to prove him wrong. She said I was going to help her haunt him. The plan she described was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. I would approach the man. I would speak to him about Rosita, about the questions that had never been answered. I would plant seeds of doubt, of paranoia, of the suspicion that perhaps the dead did not rest as easily as he believed. And while I did this, she would work on him from the other side. She would appear in his peripheral vision. She would whisper in his ear when he was alone. She would leave signs that only he would recognize, evidence that his victim had not gone quietly into the darkness. She would break him down day by day, night by night, until the guilt he had buried rose up and consumed him. She said it would take time. She said it might not work. She said he might be strong enough to resist, to convince himself that what he was seeing was not real. But she was patient. She had nothing but time. And eventually everyone broke. Everyone confessed. Everyone faced the truth of what they had done. I asked what would happen if he confessed. I asked what would happen to her. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, younger, almost like the voice of the girl I had first met. She said she did not know. She said she hoped she would be able to rest. She said being trapped between worlds was worse than anything she could have imagined, worse than the moment of her death, worse than the fear and pain and betrayal of her last moments. She said she would do anything to make it stop. I lay there in the darkness considering what she was asking. She wanted me to help her torment a murderer. She wanted me to participate in a haunting that might drive a man to madness or worse. She wanted me to become an accomplice in something that walked the line between justice and revenge. And somewhere in the cold calculation of fear and self-preservation, I found something unexpected. I found anger. I thought about Rosita walking home from school, trusting that the world was safe. I thought about hands closing around her throat, squeezing until the light went out of her eyes. I thought about her body left at the crossroads like trash, about her mother sitting alone on that faded blue porch, about a village that knew the truth and chose silence over justice. I thought about all the years I had spent being quiet, being obedient, being the woman my husband expected me to be. I thought about how I had accepted loneliness and isolation because fighting against them seemed too hard. I thought about how I had let life happen to me instead of happening to life. And I decided that I was done being passive. I told Rosita I would help her. The cold retreated. The darkness seemed to lighten slightly, though no new source of light had appeared. I heard something that might have been a sigh, might have been a sob, might have been the sound of a weight being lifted from shoulders that had carried it far too long. She thanked me. Her voice was thick with emotion, trembling on the edge of tears that the dead perhaps could not shed. She said she had been so afraid I would refuse. She said she had been so afraid she would be alone forever. I told her she was not alone anymore. I told her I would see this through to the end, whatever that end might be. Then something unexpected happened. The darkness receded, not fully, but enough for me to make out shapes in the room. The cold eased to something merely uncomfortable rather than deadly. And standing before me, illuminated by a faint glow that seemed to emanate from her own skin, was Rosita. Not the monster I had seen moments before, not the gray-skinned horror with too many teeth. Just a girl. Just a 12-year-old girl in a white dress with braided hair and orange ribbons, with eyes that were dark but human, with a smile that was sad but genuine. She said there was something she needed to show me first. She said I needed to understand exactly what had been done to her, what kind of man I would be facing. She said the truth was ugly, but I could not fight an enemy I did not know. She held out her hand. I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to touch her, not to make physical contact with something that had already demonstrated how dangerous it could be. But I had made a promise, and some part of me, the part that had been buried under decades of compliance and fear, wanted to know, wanted to see, wanted to understand what had happened to this child who had crossed the boundary between death and life to find me. I took her hand. The world dissolved. I was no longer in my house. I was standing at the crossroads beneath the ancient oak tree, but it was different now. Brighter. The sun was high overhead, and the air was warm with late summer heat. I could hear birds singing, could smell the dry grass and the dust of the road. A girl walked toward me along the path. Rosita, alive and whole, her basket of candy swinging from her arm, humming a tune I did not recognize. She did not see me. I was a ghost in this memory, invisible and intangible, able only to watch. A truck appeared on the road behind her, blue with rust on the fenders, just as Teresa had described. It slowed as it approached Rosita, the driver, rolling down his window, calling out to her. I could not hear the words, but I could see Rosita's body language change. Tension in her shoulders, a step backward, the beginning of refusal. Then I saw the man. He was perhaps 50 years old, with the kind of face that looked friendly on the surface, but revealed something else beneath if you looked long enough. He smiled at Rosita, and the smile did not reach his eyes. He said something else, and this time I could make out the words. He said her mother had asked him to pick her up. He said there was an emergency at home. He said she needed to come with him right away. Rosita hesitated. She looked down the road toward the village, toward home, toward safety. Then she looked back at the man in the truck, at his lying smile, at the trap he had set for her. She shook her head. She said she would walk. She said she did not need a ride. The smile disappeared from the man's face. Something else took its place, something cold and calculating, something that had been waiting beneath the surface all along. He opened the door of his truck and stepped out. I wanted to scream. I wanted to warn her. I wanted to do something, anything to change what I knew was about to happen. But I was a ghost in this memory, powerless to intervene, able only to witness. He grabbed her. Rosita fought. She kicked and scratched and bit, struggling against hands that were too strong, too experienced, too determined. Her candy basket fell to the ground, scattering sweets across the dirt. Her screams echoed off the trees, but there was no one to hear. The crossroads were empty. The village was too far away. He threw her into the truck. The memory shifted. I was in a different place now, somewhere dark and enclosed, a room with no windows and walls that seemed to press inward. Rosita was there, huddled in a corner, her dress torn, her face streaked with tears. The man stood over her, speaking in a voice too low for me to hear, making promises or threats that I could not distinguish. I will not describe what happened next. Some things are too terrible to put into words, too obscene to record for posterity. I watched because I had to watch, because Rosita needed me to understand, because bearing witness was the price of the alliance I had made. But I will carry those images to my grave, and I pray that when I die, they will die with me. When it was over, when he had taken everything he wanted, he wrapped his hands around her throat. I saw Rosita's eyes go wide with understanding. I saw her mouth form the word no. I saw her hands come up to claw at his wrists, her legs kick against the floor, her body fight with everything it had left against the death that was closing in. I saw the light go out of her eyes. I saw him drop her body like an empty sack, like garbage, like something that had served its purpose and could now be discarded. I saw him carry her to the crossroads under cover of darkness and leave her there for the village to find. And I saw his face. I knew him. Of course I knew him. In a village this small, everyone knows everyone. I had bought groceries from his store. I had nodded to him on the street. I had sat in the same church pews and listened to the same sermons and never once suspected that behind his ordinary face lived a monster capable of what I had just witnessed. His name was Porfirio Mendoza, and he had killed Rosita Hernandez Garcia with his bare hands. The memory released me. I gasped and staggered, finding myself back in my own house, my own body, my own present moment. Rosita still stood before me, her hand still clasped in mine, her eyes fixed on my face with an intensity that burned. She asked if I understood now. She asked if I saw what kind of man he was, what he had done, what he had gotten away with for 2 months, while she rotted in the ground and her mother wept alone. I could not speak. My throat was closed with horror and rage, with the sickness of what I had witnessed, with the burning need to do something, anything to make it right. I nodded. I squeezed her cold hand. I tried to convey through touch what words could not express. She smiled. It was a sad smile, weighted with the knowledge of her own death, but it was also a hopeful smile, the smile of someone who had finally found an ally after months of solitary suffering. She said we would begin tomorrow. She said she would show me what to do, where to go, what to say. She said together we would make Porfirio Mendoza face the truth of what he had done. Then she released my hand. The glow around her began to fade. She was leaving, returning to wherever the dead went when they were not haunting the living, preparing for the campaign of terror we were about to unleash. But before she disappeared entirely, she said one more thing, a warning, a promise, a statement of fact that I did not fully understand until later. She said I should be careful. She said that when you help the dead, you attract their attention. She said there were other things in the darkness, other spirits, other entities that were not as benevolent as she was, that fed on the energy created when the living and the dead interacted. She said she would try to protect me, but she could not guarantee my safety. She said some doors, once opened, could never be fully closed again. Then she was gone, and I was alone in my house in the early hours of the morning, with the weight of what I had learned pressing down on my shoulders like a shroud. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. I sat in my chair and stared at the wall and thought about Porfirio Mendoza, about his friendly smile and his monster's heart, about the 12-year-old girl he had violated and murdered and discarded like refuse. I thought about justice and revenge, about whether there was any meaningful difference between them when the crime was this terrible and the legal system had so completely failed. I thought about what Rosita had said about other things in the darkness, about doors that could not be closed. And I realized that I did not care. Whatever consequences came from helping her, whatever dark forces I might attract, whatever price I might ultimately pay, it would be worth it. Because some crimes demand a response. Some injustices cannot be allowed to stand. Some debts must be collected, even if the collectors are the dead themselves. Tomorrow, I would begin hunting a murderer. Tomorrow, I would become the instrument of a ghost's vengeance. I did not know then what that vengeance would cost me. I did not know how deep into the darkness I would have to descend, what parts of myself I would have to sacrifice, what horrors I would have to witness before the end. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: Porfirio Mendoza would pay for what he had done. One way or another, by law or by something older and darker, he would face the truth of his sins. And I would be there to watch him fall. The days that followed blur together in my memory like watercolors left out in the rain. I did what Rosita asked. I approached Porfirio Mendoza in his store, made small talk, asked innocent questions about his family, his business, his plans for the upcoming Dia de Muertos celebration. I watched his face for any sign of guilt, any flicker of recognition that I knew what he had done. He smiled at me with the same friendly expression he showed everyone, and I smiled back while my stomach churned with revulsion. Rosita worked on him from the shadows. She appeared in his peripheral vision when he was alone in his store. She whispered his name when he walked past the crossroads where he had left her body. She left marigold petals on his pillow and his shoes floating in his morning coffee. She was patient and relentless, a ghost, with nothing but time and everything to prove. It took 3 weeks for him to break. I was not there when it happened. I learned about it later from Consuelo, from the whispers that spread through the village like wildfire. Porfirio Mendoza walked into the church during evening mass, fell to his knees before the altar, and confessed to the murder of Rosita Hernandez Garcia. He confessed to everything, every terrible detail, while the congregation sat in stunned silence, and Father Domingo crossed himself over and over as if warding off evil. The police came from the city. They took Porfirio away in handcuffs. Teresa Hernandez stood in the street and watched the truck disappear down the road, and for the first time since her daughter's death, I saw something other than grief on her face. Not happiness, not satisfaction. Something closer to relief, the release of a burden that had been crushing her for months. Justice, or something like it, had finally been served. I expected to feel triumph. I expected to feel the satisfaction of a mission accomplished, a promise kept, a wrong made right. Instead, I felt hollow, scraped out from the inside, as if the weeks of fear and horror had consumed something essential in me that would never grow back. I went home. I locked my doors. I sat in my chair and stared at the wall and waited for Rosita to appear, to thank me, to say goodbye, to finally rest now that her murderer had been brought to justice. She did not come. The first night passed in silence, the second night as well. By the third night, I began to hope that it was over, that Rosita had found peace, that the door between our worlds had finally closed. I slept for the first time in weeks, a deep and dreamless sleep that felt like sinking into warm water. I woke at 3:33 in the morning. The room was cold, colder than it should have been, colder than the October night outside my windows. My breath came out in white clouds. Frost had formed on the inside of the glass, spreading in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like words in a language I could not read. I pulled my blanket tighter around my shoulders and tried to go back to sleep. Then I heard the footsteps. Light, careful footsteps moving through my house. The same footsteps I had heard on that first night before Rosita ever knocked on my door. They circled my bed, pausing at the foot, then moving to the side, then stopping directly beside my pillow. I kept my eyes closed. I did not want to see. I did not want to know what was standing over me in the darkness, watching me pretend to sleep. A voice spoke, soft as a whisper, cold as the grave. It said my name. I opened my eyes. Rosita stood beside my bed, but she was different now. Changed. The gray pallor had faded from her skin, replaced by something that almost looked like life. The bruises around her throat had disappeared. She was wearing a clean white dress, unmarked by blood or earth, and her hair was neatly braided with fresh orange ribbons. She looked peaceful. She looked ready. She said she had come to say goodbye. She said the door was finally opening for her, the passage to whatever lay beyond this half-existence between life and death. She said she could feel it calling to her, pulling her forward, promising rest and reunion, and an end to the cold loneliness of being a ghost. I asked if she was happy. I asked if justice had given her what she needed. She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen on her face since I learned the truth about what she was. She said she was not sure happy was the right word. She said there was still pain, still anger, still the memory of hands around her throat, and the darkness that followed. But she said those things were fading now, growing distant, losing their power over her. She said she was ready to let go. I wanted to say something profound. I wanted to tell her that knowing her had changed me, that helping her had given purpose to my empty life, that I would never forget her. But the words stuck in my throat, and all I could do was nod and reach out to touch her hand one final time. Her fingers were warm, not ice cold, not the chill of the dead, but warm like a living child's hand on a summer afternoon. I gasped at the sensation, at the impossible miracle of warmth from someone who had been dead for months. She laughed, and the sound was pure and bright, untainted by the horror of her death or the darkness of her haunting. She said she had one last gift for me. She said she wanted me to have something to remember her by, something to prove that what had happened between us was real and not just the delusion of a lonely old woman. She pressed something into my palm. Then she leaned forward and kissed my forehead, a brief touch of lips that felt like sunlight and smelled like marigolds. She whispered that she would never forget me either. She whispered that when my time came, she would be waiting on the other side to guide me through. Then she was gone. Not disappeared, not vanished. Gone in the way that morning mist is gone when the sun rises gently and naturally and inevitably. I felt her absence like a physical thing, a warmth removed from the room, a presence subtracted from my life. But I did not feel grief. I felt something closer to gratitude, to the bittersweet joy of watching someone you love finally find peace. I looked down at the object in my hand. It was one of her orange ribbons, the ones she'd worn in her braided hair. It was real and solid, made of silk that felt soft against my fingers, tied in a small bow, as if she had just removed it from her hair. I held it up to the moonlight coming through the window and watched it glow like a small flame. I placed the ribbon on my bedside table and lay back down. Sleep came easily this time, deep and peaceful, unmarred by nightmares or visitations. When I woke the next morning, the sun was streaming through my windows and the birds were singing outside, and the world felt new in a way it had not felt for years. I reached for the ribbon. It was still there, exactly where I had left it, proof that the events of the past weeks had not been a dream or a delusion. I picked it up and held it against my chest and allowed myself to cry, finally, for everything that had happened, everything I had witnessed, everything I had lost and gained in the strange communion between a lonely old woman and a murdered child. I kept the ribbon. I still have it. It sits on my dresser next to the photograph of Aurelio, a splash of orange against the faded colors of my room. Sometimes late at night I pick it up and hold it and remember the girl who came to my door selling candy and stayed to teach me that courage can exist, even in the weakest among us. 2 months passed. Life returned to something like normal. Porfirio Mendoza was convicted of murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Teresa Hernandez began to smile again, tentatively, as if remembering how. The village stopped whispering and started talking openly about what had happened, processing the horror collectively in a way that seemed to help everyone heal. I thought it was over. I was wrong. It happened on a Tuesday evening, exactly 2 months after Rosita said goodbye. I was sitting in my kitchen preparing dinner when I heard it. 3 knocks. Light, evenly spaced, almost musical. I froze. My hand stopped halfway to the cutting board. My heart began to pound against my ribs. 3 knocks, the same pattern, the same rhythm, coming from my front door. I stood up slowly, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked toward the door. The knocking came again, 3 times. Patient, waiting. I reached for the handle. My fingers trembled. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn around, to pretend I was not home. But I had opened this door before. I had welcomed what stood on the other side, and some part of me, the part that would always be lonely no matter how much time passed, wanted to open it again. I pulled the door wide. No one was there. The doorstep was empty. The dirt path leading to my gate showed no footprints, no sign that anyone had approached. But lying on the worn wood of my threshold was a single flower, a marigold, fresh and bright, its orange petals glowing in the fading evening light. I picked it up. The petals were soft. The stem was cool. It was real as the ribbon on my dresser, as real as the memories I carried of a girl in a white dress who had crossed the boundary between death and life to find me. I looked out at the empty road, at the trees swaying in the evening breeze, at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. I saw nothing unusual. No figures in white. No children with baskets of candy, just the ordinary world going about its ordinary business. But as I turned to go back inside, I heard something. Faint, distant, carried on the wind like a half-remembered song. Laughter, a child's laughter, light and bright and utterly familiar. I stood in my doorway for a long time, listening. The laughter did not come again. The evening deepened into night. The stars multiplied overhead until the sky was thick with them. I never learned where the marigold came from. I never learned who knocked on my door that evening. Maybe it was Rosita returned from wherever the dead go checking on the woman who had helped her find justice. Maybe it was something else entirely. One of those other things she had warned me about, the entities that feed on the energy created when the living and the dead interact. I do not know. I may never know. But I keep the flower pressed between the pages of my Bible, next to the ribbon, next to the photograph of a girl who died too young and refused to stay silent about it. And every evening when the clock approaches 7 minutes past 5, I find myself watching the door, waiting. Some doors once opened can never be fully closed again. Rosita told me that on the night we made our bargain, I did not understand what she meant then. I think I understand now. The boundary between the living and the dead is thinner than we imagine, and once you have crossed it, once you have touched the other side and let it touch you back, you are marked. You belong in some small way to both worlds. The dead will always be able to find you. They will always know your name. I am not afraid. I have made my peace with what I am, with what I have become. I helped a murdered child find justice. I opened my door to a ghost and did not turn away. Whatever comes next, whatever knocks on my door in the years I have left, I will face it the same way I faced Rosita, with open eyes, with an open heart, with the knowledge that there are worse things in this world than being haunted. Loneliness is one of them. So I wait, and I watch, and I listen for the sound of 3 knocks light and evenly spaced that might come at any moment. The dead remember those who helped them. They always come back. And perhaps when my time finally arrives, that will not be such a terrible thing.